welcome back to Friend Crush. I'm Amber Akilla, and this is my podcast where I talk about stuff and things. I hope everyone has been well. I am sorry that I'm not very consistent with uploads, but it actually stresses me out because I want to talk about things, but my understanding and perspective and opinion on certain things is constantly changing. So I record episodes and then I reflect back on them, or as I'm editing them, I'll be like, oh wait, I didn't mention this. Oh wait, I could have talked about this. Oh, but now I've changed my mind. I don't necessarily think like that anymore. So I actually have recorded this specific episode 3 times already. And then I just keep changing my mind about what I want to say, or feel like I'm missing information, or I can't cover everything I want to cover is, I don't know. I'm worried that I'm incoherent half the time. Anyway, I suppose I will just have to keep making podcasts and posting, and hopefully just through the process of doing, I'll get better at this. But today's episode, I want to talk about reading and why reading is cool, / how to manage your time online and offline, because that's definitely something I've been experimenting with and exploring in the last year. And I just feel like we aren't really taught how to manage our time online and offline in explicit ways, because we're still kind of in the thick of this social media technological age, and it's in companies' best interest for us to be online all the time because they want to sell advertising space, but it's still sold to us like Instagram activism or whatever. And I don't know, I feel like we're having good intentions being co-opted in order to make money, or resell this illusion of empowerment through consumerism that doesn't necessarily exist in reality, or doesn't translate into a genuine feeling of empowerment. And I've always believed that empowerment isn't something that you can buy. It's something that you need to cultivate for yourself. But at the same time, I don't think there's anything wrong with demanding more diversity and inclusivity when it comes to advertising and campaigns and representation. And of course, I've benefited from that, but I would never want people to confuse representation with the be all and end all of social progress. I feel like representation should inspire people to continue on their journey of self-empowerment. But sometimes I feel like so much emphasis is placed on external society changing, and not enough emphasis is given to the importance of looking within for your own empowerment, because ultimately we are all part of society, and it's really easy for people to hand over the keys to their own empowerment to other people when they focus so much on being able to identify external problems and not really understanding how those problems affect themselves individually. Because systemic problems exist because a set of values and ideology have been drilled into the consciousness of the population that it tries to control or exploit. And I feel like in the West, especially in democratic countries, there's so much finger pointing to injustice in other countries and political differences that it becomes a distraction from us being able to properly assess the reality that we live in, and the responsibility that we have, and the contribution that Western countries have had in global inequality. Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent. Let's get back to the topic of reading. So I've been able to do a lot of reading in the last year just for myself. I've always been into self-help / self-development, spirituality, learning about human behavior and relationships, connection. etc. I actually don't know how people just raw dog life. Like, I've literally been reading self-help since I was like 13, and I still feel like I don't have my shit together. I feel definitely much more confident in how far I've come. That's the kind of reading that I generally do, and I think I've been doing more like political and social commentary, observation reading, which has also been really illuminating. Like, I like seeing how all of these things come together because, like I said, we are society, and interpersonal relationships collectively become societal dynamics and trajectory. So I think it's really easy to focus on only the like societal dynamics and issues that we face, or focus only on interpersonal issues without thinking about how all of these things connect. And you need to have like empathy and understanding of the ways in which other people will try to like exercise power over you in order to understand how to choose more wisely for yourself and like essentially free yourself from the expectations that can be foisted onto you and live authentically instead. So I feel like social media creates this illusion of social progress and understanding just because the format of the content is so short, and it's such like it's like a constant stream of information, but you're basically like reality jumping every time you're watching somebody's story. Like, you switch from one story to another, one person's Instagram story to another. You're looking at content from people from all over the world, differing opinions, or having the same sort of general opinion being thrown in your face just by different people. I think it takes a lot of energy to be on social media and think critically about what you're looking at. At least I find it a lot of energy. It takes a lot of energy for me, because when I'm looking in comment sections and stuff, I'm actually shook at how personally people take content on social media that's not necessarily like directed at them, but because people aren't properly managing their time offline, their time online can seem so chaotic and exhausting. Like, I can't imagine feeling the need to post hate comments on people's stuff, or just like, I don't know, be rude and mean on the internet. But that's how it can be. And yeah, to be online is just like, I don't know. It's so different to how it was when I was younger. I just miss the simpler time. Like, literally every single part of the internet is being commercialized and commodified. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, because brands and companies, whatever, corporations will say anything to get you to spend money or to use you in order to make money. Because I've watched so many documentaries about social media, and all of these like social media company CEOs coming out and saying that they didn't realize the consequences of the thing that they created, and they feel that we're literally barreling towards the sunken place when it comes to how we use social media and the impact that it's having on society. The beast is bigger than they are. Like, the companies that they used to work for have more power than they have in being able to warn people against how they spend their time on social media and the way that they consume information. So reading is important to me because I feel like when you're on social media, you're just looking at other people's life. Like, you feel like you're learning because you might read something that sparks something in you, but you don't really spend enough time on that concept or thought to have it really like be absorbed. So that's why you get all these people who like speak in inspirational quotes but don't live like a particularly inspirational life, because they're not actually taking any of the information that they've read online and like implementing it in their day-to-day life, which is expected if they haven't really been told how to do that. And I just don't feel like Instagram and TikTok specifically really allows you to do that. You're literally just like acquiring superficial knowledge, but not necessarily understanding anything properly. So reading, in contrast, reading books, I think because you're so focused on like one person speaking to you, you learn so much more about yourself and the world by engaging with information in that way. And generally, like a book is going to have higher quality information in it than your Instagram or TikTok feed. I feel like social media is a good way to communicate and indicate issues and topics that people should explore in more depth, but it can't just be discussed on social media for people to have a proper understanding of it. And obviously books can be biased too, but I think reading encourages a type of critical thinking that you don't necessarily get when you're on social media. I feel like it's easier for me to think critically while reading than when I'm on social media, because it is such a visual way to consume random bursts of information. Like, I think just because you have the illusion of processing information better visually doesn't mean that it's the best way to communicate all information, if that makes sense. And so many of these like social justice issues that people talk about on social media, like they simplify very complicated issues, even though a lot of people try to argue that like it's black and white, it's good versus evil. Like when you understand and learn more about human behavior and psychology and how all of these like geopolitical issues have come about, it's not as simple as people want to make it. And I don't think that life is good versus evil all the time. There's good and bad on both sides to different degrees, and an inability to see that creates division. And then from that division, you get violence. So, I don't know. I think reading allows you to see that bigger picture in a way that social media doesn't. I don't really know how many times people want to say and act like they're making like huge changes from making a social media post or whatever. I feel like it can only be the cherry on top. It can't be the whole sundae. You know what I mean? Also, I think social media creates this like, I mean, we already know about echo chambers and stuff, but it can create such a narrow view of issues. It can be so reductive that you feel helpless in your ability to like do anything productive, like whether it's for yourself or for the world. And also like can be quite alienating, because on the one hand you're like connected to all these other people, but at the same time you're like isolated because you're by yourself looking at your phone. I don't know, I feel like you just become so zeroed in on people's opinions and experiences that you lose sight of the bigger picture. At least that's how I feel sometimes. And when I'm reading about history or human behavior and spirituality, I'm reminded that so many of the issues that we face today, solutions and analysis of them have already been made in different contexts, because what we see in history when history repeats itself is not the repetition of events, but the repetition of certain dynamics that result in types of events. And I think social media makes you think about just the events themselves and not the things that have caused such events to occur. I'm currently reading The Power of the Powerless by Václav Havel, and it's like a collection of essays, or it's an essay that was written, I think, in the 70s by a guy who became the president of the Czech Republic. Honestly, my Soviet history is not so great, but what he talks about in this book is what he thinks is the difference between totalitarianism and post-totalitarianism. And what he observes and the dynamics of what he observes are relevant to like what we see in society today. And this was written like 40 years ago, 50 years ago. To me, it provides like perspective on what's happening in the world, and then gives me like more knowledge and wisdom in how I want to handle life or live my life, rather than social media, which just makes you feel so emotionally charged in regards to certain issues that you kind of like feel helpless in the face of them and the weight of them. So let me see if there's anything here that I can read and share with you. Okay, so he talks about what the aims of a post-totalitarian system are, and he says, the inner aim of the post-totalitarian system is not mere preservation of power in the hands of a ruling clique, as appears to be the case at first sight. Rather, the social phenomenon of self-preservation is subordinated to something higher, to a kind of blind automatism which drives the system. No matter what position individuals hold in the hierarchy of power, they are not considered by the system to be worth anything in themselves, but only as things intended to fuel and serve this automatism. For this reason, an individual's desire for power is admissible only insofar as its direction coincides with the direction of the automatism of the system. Ideology, in creating a bridge of excuses between the system and the individual, spans the abyss between the aims of the system and the aims of life. It pretends that the requirements of the system derive from the requirements of life. It is a world of appearances trying to pass for reality. And I think this is interesting when you think about it in today's context and like the pervasiveness, ubiquitousness of capitalism, how like every single part of our life is being commercialized and commodified. People are so used to trying to make money or feeling like they have to make money from every single part of their life that it can feel like it's a law of nature to try to sell yourself at all times. But this is part of like capitalist and consumerist ideology. This idea that you can buy your identity is not like a natural law, but it is sold as one to get people to participate in society in these ways. And then he talks about ideology as well. So if ideology was originally a bridge between the system and the individual as an individual, then the moment he or she steps onto this bridge, it becomes at the same time a bridge between the system and the individual as a component of the system. That is, if ideology originally facilitated by acting outwardly the constitution of power by serving as a psychological excuse, then from the moment that excuse is accepted, it constitutes power inwardly, becoming an active component of that power. It begins to function as a principal instrument of ritual communication within the system of power. It's basically saying that ideology is not as simple, because I always think like systemic oppression and systems of power, it's not like a building that you're trying to knock over. It's like a set of ideas that you need to unlearn. That's the importance of awareness when it comes to social change, because if you don't really know how you're being oppressed or the values that you've internalized as a result of just being brought up in a society with a certain set of values, then how can you ever really be free? Because you're always going to be acting from within the parameters that society has given you and not thinking like outside of the system per se. So he continues a little bit later and says, as the interpretation of reality by the power structure, ideology is always subordinated ultimately to the interests of the structure. Therefore, it has a natural tendency to disengage itself from reality, to create a world of appearances, to become ritual. In societies where there is public competition for power and therefore public control of that power, there also exists quite naturally public control of the way that power legitimates itself ideologically. Consequently, in such conditions, there are always certain correctives that effectively prevent an ideology from abandoning reality altogether. Under totalitarianism, however, these correctives disappear, and thus there is nothing to prevent ideology from becoming more and more removed from reality, gradually turning into what it has already become in the post-totalitarian system. A world of appearances, a mere ritual, a formalized language deprived of semantic contact with reality and transformed into a system of ritual signs that replace reality with pseudo-reality. And even though this was written in the 70s, like that is literally describing what happens on social media, the way that it's like ritual and virtue signaling for people to like assert the idea of who they want to be or the values and the movements they want to be associated with, not like how they're actually living. Like people are constructing personas, constructing identities online that might exist completely separately to how they actually live their life. And I think like call out culture and cancel culture, it intends to try to call out these contradictions, but I feel like the people that it's aimed at and the effectiveness of this kind of strategy is not so great. That's a discussion for a different time. Then he says, yet as we have seen, ideology becomes at the same time an increasingly important component of power, a pillar providing it with both excusatory legitimacy and inner coherence. As this aspect grows in importance, and as it gradually loses touch with reality, it acquires a peculiar but very real strength. It becomes reality itself, albeit a reality altogether, self-contained. One that on certain levels, chiefly inside the power structure, may have even greater weight than reality as such. Increasingly, the virtuosity of the ritual becomes more important than the reality hidden behind it. The significance of phenomena no longer derives from the phenomena themselves, but from their locus as concepts in the ideological context. Reality does not shape theory, but rather the reverse. Thus, power gradually draws closer to ideology than it does to reality. It draws its strength from theory and becomes entirely dependent on it. This inevitably leads, of course, to a paradoxical result. Rather than theory, or rather ideology, serving power, power begins to serve ideology. It is as though ideology has appropriated power from power, as though it had become dictator itself. It then appears that theory itself, ritual itself, ideology itself makes decisions that affect people and not the other way around. And yeah, this is a problem that I see with like the internet and the way that people discuss problems online, is that people are so defined by which side of the political spectrum they exist on, that everything, the way that they interpret the world is seen only through that lens, and then it alienates them from information that could help them to better understand the issues that they are trying to find solutions for. People don't want to believe that leftist thinking is a set of like based on a set of ideological principles, and when you cling so tightly onto that identification, it skews the way that you interpret certain issues and reality and alienates you from the people that you identify as oppressor, which would be like people on right-wing side of politics. And I think the same for them, it can become myopic how you see the world, because you're only seeing everything as like us versus them. What it's basically saying to me is that ideology is something that is usually formed like in retrospect, looking at patterns. Like when I was studying art history, a lot of the definitions of certain art movements were actually formed after the movement had happened, or like after enough pieces of artwork were made in a certain style that you could say, okay, this is a particular movement. Or it would be like a group of people who have decided on a set of ideas and values that they are working towards, that are aspirational, and that becomes its own ideology or its own movement, becomes like a catalyst for a movement. So ideology is like something that you use to assess reality or assess a set of circumstances. It doesn't have to be the way that you define yourself. Like the artist is still going to make art the way they want to, and then the people that analyze it are going to find different ways to categorize it. And I think that's how life should be. Like you should be able to live your life the way that you want to, and then other people are going to make decisions on how they analyze and interpret your choices. And when you focus only on the analysis, then you get caught up in kind of like preempting the outcome. And that's what happens when people focus too much on identifying problems in society and feeling like that their experience is defined by the way that it's being analyzed or categorized, and not balancing that with how they live. So for example, like if I'm able to identify racism, and because I'm a woman of color, I know that I'll experience racism. If I'm only thinking about the ways that I'm oppressed in white supremacy, then I'm always going to be living in a way that is either defined by or in opposition to my understanding of white supremacy. But the point is to have an awareness that white supremacy can exist and to choose to live my life without that having to be like how I define myself. Does that make any sense? And I think that's a problem when people get caught up in social issues and identifying oppressors and subconsciously assuming the role of the oppressed. You kind of just get into this spiral of like feeling like you need to wait for society to change in order to have permission to live. But I feel like we're all part of society, so people kind of try to distance themselves from problems by being able to identify them, but everybody is like both the oppressed and the oppressor in different degrees, depending on like where you sit in the hierarchy of society or like what role you play. And that's okay. Like there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But social change comes from being able to build awareness around those things so that you can make decisions with more consciousness and wisdom. And then by virtue of that, and people who are trying to do that connecting, society will then naturally change as a result. You can't demand for society to change while not doing anything to change how you engage with society. Does that make any sense? Oh my God. I just really want to encourage people to get out of the spiral of hopelessness that you can feel sucked into by spending too much time online or on social media. And I think reading is a really good way to counterbalance that and recenter yourself so that you can engage with social media with like less attachment to the things that you're viewing and have it as more like a source of entertainment than like a connection to life itself. And it's not always conscious, like the way that we are using social media in this way, but that's just something that I kind of felt or feel can happen quite easily. And I feel like in capitalist, consumerist, techno, solutionist culture, people want you to think that solutions to societal issues are complex and we're discovering. We need to discover the cure, discover the remedy. But in actual fact, we've been so alienated from what is important in life, our connection to ourselves, our connection to each other. Those are the things that matter the most. And those are the things that you can't buy. There's no app that's going to fix the inability for humans to like connect with themselves and connect with others. All of these things are only tools that might be able to encourage or like manage those connections, but they can't do it for us, you know, like even if you have all these different apps that are supposed to connect you with different types of people, if you haven't done any self-reflection, haven't taken the time to understand yourself, to build skills in communication and understanding of interpersonal relationships, it doesn't matter how many people you're matched with on an app, you'll never be able to connect with them in person if you don't really know who you are. Your relationships will never go anywhere if you don't understand what it means, what it takes to be in a relationship. So in the same way that we'll never be able to really see a change in society if we don't understand the root of what society has been built on, the foundation that the society we live in has been built on, if we aren't able to build an awareness of how all of these different parts of our lives have been co-opted for profit and just make healthier decisions. Because I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with wanting to look nice or wanting to have nice things or wanting to have friends or wanting to have romantic relationships. But I think that our desires have been capitalized off to alienate us from the simple truth that is taking time to yourself, reflecting, developing a connection and understanding to God, the universe, understanding love, understanding art, creativity. All of those things are free, like they're part of being alive, but capitalism is a framework that makes you think that you have to buy those things, or that you have to, I don't know, like work towards, hustle towards happiness, but happiness is already within you as a person. Like, I don't really know how to even explain this properly, but okay, I'm going to think about it more, and let's get back to the benefits of reading. Okay, so there's this article on healthline.com that talks about the benefits of reading. I'm just going to go over it and put the link in the description so you can read it yourself, but I'm skipping to the end, and it says, the takeaway. Reading is very, very good for you. Research shows that regular reading improves brain connectivity, increases your vocabulary and comprehension, empowers you to empathize with other people, aids in sleep readiness, reduces stress, lowers blood pressure and heart rate, fights depression symptoms, prevents cognitive decline as you age, and contributes to a longer life. And the effects of reading are cumulative, so it's never too late to begin taking advantage of the many physical and psychological benefits waiting for you in reading the pages of a good book. So social media in and of itself is not bad, but I feel like it's easy to not have good management of the way that you use social media. And because these apps are being designed to like suck our attention in and prey on like our dopamine and serotonin receptors or whatever, and like the reptilian part of our brain, it's important that we as consumers exercise self-control when using these platforms so that we can better manage our time on them and better manage like our life and well-being in general. And I think because reading is not something that you can really make super instantaneous. I mean, I've even tried reading through apps like Blinkist, which provides summaries of books, and I don't actually feel like I get that much out of it because it's so much better to have context and like read a whole book and see the author's vision in its fullest form instead of just reading dot points. Like, if it was so easy to understand topics through simply dot points and infographics, like, we would have experienced more social change than we have. There's obviously a necessity for the whole book and not just a dot point summary of it. I think reading gives you additional perspective. It gives you more context for the world as you're living it in a way that you couldn't just get if you just lived and only knew about your specific experience. So I appreciate the perspective that reading gives me. Like, I'm reading The Body Keeps the Score at the moment as well, a book about trauma. And even in like the first 20 pages, it's like so intense the way that it talks about the effects of trauma on war veterans. And it really just allows you to have empathy for people who have suffered so much mental and physical trauma, and also gives you a window for gratitude that you didn't have to like go and survive a war and then come back to your country with like PTSD. So anyway, yeah, reading is cool. I encourage you to do it if you aren't already. I used to say that I preferred reading physical books, and to a degree I prefer the experience of reading a physical book, but I actually quite enjoy using Kindle and the Kindle mobile app because you can highlight and then you can see a summary of the things that you've highlighted, so you can revisit a book really easily, you know, when you're on the go or just later down the line. It's much harder to like find the parts of a book that I highlight in a physical book. And I don't really listen to audiobooks, but I have a few friends that really like audiobooks. So yeah, if you're not into reading already, I think just experiment with different formats. I really like the Kindle app as well because if I'm waiting for like a coffee or eating out or something by myself and waiting, I'm not just scrolling through social media and I'm actually able to just like read something. And yeah, I think it's also very different, like reading for pleasure when you get older versus reading for school when you're young. Like, I didn't really enjoy reading for school that much, although I appreciate the text that I did study in English class when I was in school, and the text that I studied when I was like doing research for my art projects. I remember reading Handmaid's Tale 1984 for English class, reading The Beauty Myth, Ways of Seeing in Art, and all of those texts have had such a profound impact on the way that I see and understand the world and myself and how I interact with it. And I really hated reading when I was at law school because the compulsory reading that we had was like, there was so much that we had to do. It was so boring that I wouldn't do it. So then I couldn't even really justify reading for pleasure half the time when I was at law school. But then in the last few years, I just have really come to value taking time to read, whether it's before bed. When I'm in Shanghai and I have to take the subway a lot, I like reading on the subway. And yeah, I think just finding even like 10 to 15 minutes a day for a little bit of reading will benefit you greatly, even if you are just reading novels or whatever. Like, I think reading is important, especially to counterbalance like the time we spend on social media and the internet now. I have a highlight on my Instagram of books that I've read and book recommendations from other people. And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on my thoughts. Thank you if you're still listening. I appreciate it. And hit me up if you have any suggestions for other things you'd like to hear me ramble about. Yeah, and any book recommendations that you have. I'm sorry this was so unstructured. Like, I actually had notes for this and I still didn't follow the guidelines that I put. Anyway, so I'll speak to you soon. Look after yourselves. Drink water, tell your friends and family you love them, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.